Hello, my friends. This is episode 263 of Stand Up. Joining me today from CNN, author and commentator John Avlon, and author and professor Jared Yates Sexton. My name is Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like the Democrats might have taken back the United States Senate. It's 12:01 a.m. on the 6th of January, 2021, and maybe it's officially 2021 because this would be a massive, massive development, not only for the United States of America, but for planet Earth because of the potential for legislation on climate and so much more. I've got a great lineup for you coming today. I got two great conversations with both John Avlon and Jared Yates Sexton. I talked to both of them yesterday before the results started coming in, and I still don't know if we're going to know officially over the next couple days. It's going to be close. It looks like Raphael Warnock has won and beaten Kelly Loeffler, and it looks like John Ossoff may eke out a win against this Purdue character. And it's just mind-blowing. I didn't want to let myself think that this was even a possibility. I didn't think it was a possibility, but thanks to a tremendous amount of efforts and organization from volunteers and so many folks, mostly amazing heroes, black folks in Georgia. I mean, just the symbolism of it all and what it means. I'm just so fired up, even here at midnight. I just a few tweets I want to read to you. Raphael Warnock's mother picked cotton, and now her black son is about to be a senator. Rex Chapman says, I'll be spending some of my tourist dollars in the great state of Georgia when we have a better grip on the virus. Bet on that. So I'll be right there with you, Rex. Jamel Bowie, New York Times, only the second black American elected to the Senate from the South since Reconstruction. Clint Smith, the Voting Rights Act was only signed 55 years ago. Tonight I'm thinking about all the black folks in Georgia who have lived on both sides of it. Who voted in this election and who remember a time when they wouldn't have been able to? It wasn't that long ago, not at all. Celeste Headley, let's start a thread of independent businesses in Georgia that you can support through online orders. Link to your favorite Georgia business here. Check that out at Celeste Headley on Twitter. All right, and I don't want to say too much more about the Georgia runoff elections because the results are not in as I'm recording this, and I got to get it out and post it. But I will be talking to folks the rest of the week about it and obviously everywhere else. But check out the conversation that's happening with stand-up community members on the Discord platform. I'll talk to you Thursday night at 8 o'clock. If you haven't signed up yet, do it now. Sign up and be a part of this community. Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic right now. This podcast comes out every day, and while it's free, it is not cheap. I put a lot of work into it. I have a great network of amazing, brilliant people that I reach out to, and so many of you as well that join me right here and contribute in so many different ways to the podcast. Tell me who you want to hear and what you'd like me to talk about, and I always consider it, because if you're a stand-up community member, you're also pretty much a producer. It really is now more than ever our show. I want to hear from you. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Also, keep those nature pictures coming. Get outside, even though it's January, and send your nature pictures. I include one from a listener every day in the morning email. If you're not getting the morning email, let me know. But if you're a Patreon subscriber, you should be getting that, and it opens with a nature picture from a listener subscriber, and it's always great. It's a great way to start your day and a great thing to include. So get outside and share your pictures with me. All right, one soundbite I've got. It was late, and I'm flipping back and forth from TV to the podcast to the emergency. I don't know why I call it emergency, but the surprise Zoom. We had a improvised Zoom hangout where like 30 people joined me last night. It was a lot of fun, as always. But here is, over on MSNBC last night, during the election returns, Brian Williams asked the question everybody wants to know, what does it mean if Republicans, rather if Democrats, take back the Senate? Who gets to be the majority leader? What does this change?
That's what this is all about tonight, is getting the Democrats to 50 in the Senate. Kamala Harris gets them to 51 with that tie-breaking vote. That's how you get Chuck Schumer as majority leader. And that's how you get all Democrats as the chairs of the committees that would be running the confirmation hearings on the Biden cabinet. Mm-hmm. And that will be a very different world than what would happen if those were all run by Republicans.
All right, Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC last night. And you got to hear this. A CNN reporter caught up with the top election official in Georgia, who we have heard a lot from. His name is Gabriel Sterling, and he didn't pull his punches. Listen to this.
Gabriel Sterling, the voting systems implementation manager for the Secretary of State, is joining me now. And Gabriel, first of all, thank you for your time, because I know you're at least the second busiest man in the state right now. But you were tweeting this morning, and you were speaking yesterday, literally begging Georgians to go out and vote. You tweeted that again this morning, and you also said, please go ahead and vote for the Republican candidates. If one of the Republican candidates, or both, lose their seats in the Senate, who would be to blame?
Well, I'll speak for outside of my role working for the state. This is a personal opinion that'll fall squarely in the shoulders of President Trump and his actions since November 3rd.
And why do you say that?
Well, when you tell people your vote doesn't count, it's been stolen, and people start to believe that, and then you go to the two senators and tell them to ask the Secretary of State to resign and trigger a civil war inside the Republican Party, we need Republicans to unite. All of that stems from his decision-making since the November 3rd election.
And you say that this all started with his calls, the president's calls for the Secretary of State Raffensperger to resign, and you believe that he single-handedly divided the party.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome. I cannot wait to hear Mitch McConnell savaging Donald Trump tomorrow. It is getting really interesting, and it's so important. So much to say about Georgia, but I got to get this podcast out, and I still don't know the results as of when I'm laying this down, but I've got to get to a whole bunch of other things that happened yesterday. I don't have anything from what's going on in Pennsylvania. I want to understand better what happened there. But crazy stuff going on in Pennsylvania. But I do want to get to some of the villains of yesterday who we heard from. He is the governor of Nebraska, Governor Ricketts. He's a Republican. And he announced on Tuesday that undocumented workers at meatpacking plants will not be eligible to receive the COVID vaccine, which, according to Migration Policy Institute, is 14% of Nebraska's meatpacking workers. Here he is with this horrible, evil, immoral, and stupid policy idea.
Again, you're supposed to be a legal resident of the country to be able to be working in those plants, so I do not expect that illegal immigrants will be part of the vaccine with that program.
Not going to be the case, obviously. But even if you don't care about those people's lives, it doesn't make any sense, because if you don't protect the workers, it exposes everybody else to the virus, and they get sick and they can't work at your stupid meat plant. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face, says Joyce Vance on Twitter, or willing to die to maintain your hate. Now let's go from Nebraska to Washington, D.C., where there was a pro-Trump rally, and at it, a speaker. I don't know who this fool is, but it was shared on Twitter at The Recount. And Tim Wise, our friend Tim Wise at Tim Jacob Wise, quoted this video, which I'll play the audio for, with the following: Darwin Awards, MAGA version. And here is that rally speaker now.
Turn to the person next to you and give them a hug. Someone you don't know. Go hug somebody. Go ahead and spread it out. Mass spreader. It's a mass spreader event. It's a mass spreader event. It's a mass spreader event.
They're hugging.
There you go. Hug it out.
They're actually hugging.
I'm married, but if you want to give me a hug too, or we can do that.
And he closes it with one of those super insecure about his own sexuality comments. And I'm married, but if you want to hug me, what a weird, bizarre thing that is when anybody ever says that. Don't touch me, I'm married. Ugh, weird. Don't look at him, he's married. Okay, good luck with that. I mean, I'm married to a woman because I'm super straight and I love, like, sexual intercourse with women and their vaginas. That would never be interested in dicks or cocks at all because I'm so married. But, I mean, if you just want to hug me, as long as our pelvises don't come anywhere near each other, then I think that's fine. Oh, and we're all going to die of COVID. And you know who else was at the D.C. rally was Pardon Trump ally, super evil scoundrel, and one of the most corrupt Americans ever to live, Roger Stone, who said, I think he misspoke here, but it's a great, great moment of truth as well when he says they're committed to fight the truth. Listen to a guy who reminds me of the Penguin from Batman, Roger Stone.
To speak the truth, to fight the truth, to live for the truth.
To fight the truth. Beautiful, just beautiful. All right, let's head across the pond and hear from Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon on speculation that Donald Trump is planning to fly to Scotland to play golf during Joe Biden's inauguration.
I have no idea what Donald Trump's travel plans are. You'll be glad to know. I hope and expect that, as everybody hopes and as everybody expects, not everybody necessarily will hope that the travel plan immediately that he has is to exit the White House. You know, we are not allowing people to come into Scotland for without an essential purpose right now, and that would apply to him just as it applies to anybody else. And coming to play golf is not what I would consider to be an essential purpose.
That's Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. I hope I'm saying her name right. And I really want to see what happens there. I didn't realize he was going there, but I saw this audio and wanted to share it with you that he speculated about going there. And let's stay over there and head over to London, where the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced that more than 2% of England's population has COVID, equivalent to 1 in 50 people. Here is that.
When everybody looks at the position, people understand overwhelmingly that we have no choice. When the Office of National Statistics is telling us that more than 2% of the population is now infected, that's over 1 million people in England.
Well, that's a pretty horrific statement, and hearing it from the Prime Minister, at least he's talking about COVID. President Trump gave a speech last night for like an hour and didn't even mention the fact that several thousand Americans are losing their lives and their loved ones every single day. And let's come back to the United States of America and head over to CNN, where Jim Sciutto had Congressman Clay Higgins, Republican of Louisiana, on. He has announced, I, by the way, tried to get this guy. I did my best. Rob Anderson was his Democratic opponent down there in Louisiana. I interviewed him here on the show. Unfortunately, he lost to this wanker, Clay Higgins. He's going to object to certification of the presidential results tomorrow. And he says we have a preponderance of evidence that election crimes may have been committed in 6 of the sovereign states. And CNN's Jim Sciutto was not having it. Here it is.
Well, we have a preponderance of evidence that election crimes may have been committed in 6 of the sovereign states.
What evidence?
Especially
give me one example.
Of the
give me one example.
States. In Georgia, change the statutory requirements for reviewing signatures. Pennsylvania eliminated signature requirements.
That's not true. The Georgia election official Sterling rejected that
I can go on and on, but let me
he
just
rejected
say,
it point by point yesterday. So I'm asking what evidence you have to contradict the state Republican election official there, as you're claiming right now. What evidence do you have?
Good sir.
And he kept calling him good sir, and I'm not going to play any more of it. It was preposterous, but that's how it should work. That's how an argument and this kind of a thing where you're making a claim that there was fraudulent voting or that something was illegal or wrong. Okay. All right. Let's see the evidence. We don't have any evidence. All right. Here's what they have. And they presented what they have, which was rumors and allegations. And it was countered and said, no, that's not true. And then they have to come back with something or they have to give up. That's how crimes are investigated. That's how prosecution works. And that is certainly what would have to happen in this case. But they don't actually have any evidence because there isn't any, because there wasn't any kind of widespread fraud or shenanigans. And they've got nothing. Okay, let me change gears to another important story with development that took place yesterday in Wisconsin, where, if you'll recall, there was a shooting last August that sparked protests and rioting. It made the city of Kenosha, Wisconsin, a real flashpoint in the unrest that began last summer with the killing of George Floyd. Well, the top prosecutor in Kenosha, Wisconsin, declined to bring charges against the police officer who shot and gravely wounded Jacob Blake outside an apartment building in August, which, of course, an episode that sparked protests and rioting, made the city an instant flashpoint in that summer unrest. And then you will also recall that a young man named Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 protesters on the streets of Kenosha, 2 of them fatally, and has become a celebrity in right-wing circles for doing that. Even though, of course, he has been arrested, he pled not guilty to charges, and his case is scheduled to proceed in March. That hasn't stopped celebrities like, what's his name, from Silver Spoons, Ricky Schroeder. I interviewed him once. He was nice enough, but he was definitely off his rocker and a real right-wing lunatic. He and others have celebrated this kid, Rittenhouse. They're selling T-shirts and all kinds of bullshit. Anyway, here is some audio of that prosecutor. His name is Michael Gravely, the Kenosha County District Attorney.
The statute requires that the district attorney, the elected district attorney in that county, must determine if there's a basis to prosecute any of the involved law enforcement. And it is my decision now that I announce today before you that no Kenosha law enforcement officer in this case will be charged with any criminal offense based on the facts and the laws as I will describe them to you now. So it is our decision that no charge will be filed. I'm going to also tell you, just because I think it is important, that no charge will be filed against Jacob Blake in regards to this incident as well. For many of the same reasons, in terms of an overall discussion about this case, that is not something that the district attorney's office intends to pursue. I'm confident about the things I'm talking about today, but I believe that the healing process begins or is improved by an opportunity for members of the public to see other prosecuting agencies make decisions, even though their laws are somewhat and slightly different.
All right, that is an edited from the New York Times, just a couple of excerpts from that press conference. And here now is Jacob Blake's father on CNN, Jacob Blake Sr.
They call me Papa, and all my grandkids call me Papa or Pop Pop. So he said, Papa, why did they shoot my daddy in the back? Where's Daddy? They want their father because he was a part of their life every day. He's a person. He's a human. He's a human being. He's not an animal. He's a human. But my son has not been afforded the rights of a human. He's not been treated like a human. He's a father. He's not a deadbeat dad. He's a father that's with his children every day.
Of course, they want answers.
Sometimes you get a little angry, sometimes more than a little angry, because we've been going through this so long. And it's only the brown faces, the brown-toed people that get treated in this way. It's two, like my lawyer said, it's two justice systems. Because that 17-year-old Caucasian shot and killed 2 people and blew another man's arm off on his way back to Antioch, Illinois. He got to go home. He got water. They gave that guy water and a high five. My son got ICU and paralyzed from the waist down. Those are the 2 justice systems right in front of me.
Jacob Blake Sr. on CNN. Here is some reaction from social media on Twitter. Newly elected Congresswoman Cori Bush said 7 bullets in the back and no charges. 7 bullets in the back and no charges. Not charging. The officer who shot Jacob Blake is a green light for police across the country to continue devaluing, dehumanizing, and destroying black lives. We need justice. Brittany Pagnett Cunningham, who's an activist on racial justice and has been for a long time, says, I'm trying to find the words for how downright infuriating it feels to have just been about to press publish on a piece about the lack of police accountability and Breonna Taylor, and only for my editor to tell me I needed to add Jacob Blake in now as well. My new Congressman Mondaire Jones tweeted, in 2020, thousands took the streets to demand hashtag Black Lives Matter. Now we begin 2021 with a shameful reminder that our criminal legal system was not designed for people who look like Jacob Blake and me. Our work is not over yet. We still have far to go. And just some random guy, black guy on Twitter named Alex Cole tweeted, being black sucks in this country. Seriously, Jacob Blake got shot 7 times in his back, and no one is going to be charged for it. This is fucked up. No matter how hard we try, we will never be equal in the eyes of these people. This shit is depressing. It certainly is. Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back in front of his children on videotape. And it's crazy. Watching that video is just crazy. My friend Qasim Rashid tweeted the Venn diagram of people justifying cops shooting Jacob Blake in the back 7 times and paralyzing him, and people justifying Kyle Rittenhouse murdering 2 innocent people and maiming a 3rd is a perfect circle. Some reactions to that horrible, horrible situation out of Kenosha, Wisconsin that caused quite a bit of rioting or protests over the summer. All right, and before I get to the news dump, one last piece of audio, which really is not important or consequential. I mean, kind of these arguments are interesting between Joy Behar and Meghan McCain on The View, but I play it more for the entertainment of the argument of Joy Behar just straight up knifing Meghan McCain. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And I don't know, I love that show. I love watching those women talk and argue. And I know them all as well. I know Joy, I know Meghan, I know Sonny, and I guess I don't know Whoopi, and I don't know the other one, whoever the other one is. It's always a wild card. No, Anna Navarro. So anyway, I like watching them. I've never watched really the show, but I always watch the clips, and, well, here it is.
You have the seditionists. That's the fight that's going on in the Republican Party right now. In the Democratic Party, you have the progressives versus the moderates, which is, de rigueur, as they say. You know, it's what it always is. It's typical politics. The Republican Party is in much more trouble right now because you have really traitors.
You have AOC saying she's going to
excuse me, am I done? I'm not done.
Well, it's just that's completely inaccurate. You have AOC fighting right now about whether or not she's going to end up primarying Chuck Schumer, coming out not saying she has the full support of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. You have the squad that's coming out very intensely, very angry that Biden hasn't filled his cabinet with more progressives. Bernie Sanders also coming out saying he's angry. The idea that there isn't fighting within the Democratic Party as well.
I was talking.
Right.
I'm talking about.
Somebody answer.
Yeah. You missed me so much when I was on maternity leave. You missed me so much. You missed fighting with me.
I did not.
You missed fighting with me.
I did not miss you.
Okay. Somebody answer the question.
Can I weigh in?
Or I'm moving on.
I'd like to weigh in.
Yeah.
So nasty.
Can I weigh in?
Okay, guys.
Rude. Like,
hold on. Stop. Everybody stop.
That's so rude.
This is not the way to do it, and so I'm going to now become Whoopi and say, Sarah, I'd like to hear from you right now.
Okay.
What have you got to say?
Thank you. I wanted to address what you were saying.
All right. Well, it's really, really upsetting and awkward, and I'm sorry that I made you listen to it, but I liked it. And you know what? Unfortunately, I don't have to skip the news dump. I'm sorry. No news dump tonight. I know, but I'm just so out of time, and I just don't have another hour to put it all together and get it out. I hung out with listener subscribers for like an hour and a half tonight, celebrating what looks to be a Democratic take-back of the Senate. And it's been called as of now by a number of different places, including the Drudge Report, reporting Dems take control. And tomorrow is going to be a big day, and I think, no doubt, it would seem a violent day as well. I hope I'm wrong about that. Thank you very much for checking out the news here. A lot of people love this opening segment, and I'm so happy to have your support and listening to it. I'm pretty proud of today's. Actually got a lot of really good stuff out, and I hope that you'll tell your friends to listen to this podcast, especially for that reason. But I have 2 awesome guests joining me coming up. Jared Yates Sexton, had almost an hour conversation with him, and one of our best took a look at Will Cain's comments on Fox News and so much more. Always great with Jared. And also always great with my first guest, who is John Avlon. John is a former speechwriter for Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York City and still somewhat sane. He's also the former managing director and editor-in-chief of The Daily Beast. Now he's an author, columnist, commentator, and senior political analyst and fill-in anchor at CNN, where his reality checks are always awesome and go viral. I caught up with John yesterday morning, and here is our conversation. Follow him on Twitter at John Avlon. Okay, here he is right now, John Avlon, fresh off his reality check on CNN this morning. Thank you for joining me.
Always, my man. Good to talk to you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well.
I think we can still say that. I think it's like a week.
Oh, I give it a month. And now I used to say it's until you see someone the first time for up to a month, but now I don't see anybody, so I feel like that's probably the same standard. Do you believe in any kind of resolution or have any kind of tradition at all that you practice, or do you think, oh, that's silly?
Well, Margaret's mother is from Texas, so we do the Southern black eyed peas and cornbread, which is really superstition slash tradition.
Yeah.
And this year she made a specially killed cornbread. I used to do resolutions, but I just kind of feel like you should do a version of that perpetually.
Yes.
Yes. And so, I always keep lists of things, goals, short term, midterm, long term. And so I don't believe in cordoning it off, because very often it just sort of makes people think it's like a box to check and then you move on, and it's not.
I think that's well said. I think that as we get older, it's even more important to keep, I think you get wiser and more forgiving and patient with yourself as well about these things. And there's cause for reevaluating, I don't know, every week. I don't know. I meditate every day. So I feel like that's kind of a reset every day on all things in a weird kind of way. And that's,
I've been doing that too. I kind of hope that I would be able to get even more disciplined about it in COVID time. There's certain times and jobs you have where, if someone tells you all you need to find is 20 minutes a day, and you're like, what, do you have a clue? What? That's just not.
No, it's for someone like you, it's absolutely a question of time. And you say, well, what really important. How is this worth it to me? I have all of these other things to do work wise, and in your case, kids wise. And how can I possibly afford this time? But it really is worth it. I think it's really worth it, even if you just do it for a few minutes a day. So I actually have gotten so good. I do levitate about three inches off the couch. I've got wings.
Well, one thing I mean, we could get into COVID best practices. I mean, one thing is I've kept tried to structure everything with sort of, COVID goals and things, you wanted to accomplish, and it's satisfying to check those things off, and some are small and some are big. But I've been a little stunned at how much time I was spending at the gym every week, and how it's kind of questionable. I could have probably done that more efficiently.
You're spending too much time at the gym.
No, I mean, if I spend, 3 to 5, 3 hours a week, 5 hours a week, I'm like, I probably could have just done 100 push-ups a day and then done cardio once a week.
We'll talk about that another time. I'll evaluate your exercise routine because I am interested in that. So lots to discuss with you in terms of, I mean, this is going to post tomorrow. So, my first question is, do you have any idea, what is the analysis as to when we will know the results of the runoff election?
So here's what you need to understand. Georgia's rules are just as they were for the general election. And that means that because of their state legislature, they count early votes after the polls close. So just like we talked endlessly about election, prepare yourself for election week, not election night, because we'd seen this sort of, what is sometimes called a red mirage and a blue wave. The real-time data will be highly selective. It will reflect the day's turnout. And then, fairly quickly, but depending on how close the election is, and there's every reason to think it will be very, very close, it will take time to get a full accounting of the vote. So I would not expect, barring a blowout on either side, which, does not look likely, to put mildly, that, you're going to have know who tonight or tomorrow morning. You may have an indication, but you're certainly not going to have definitive numbers. And the thing is, that does not reflect anything other than the way the system has been set up, really, by Republicans in the state of Georgia. And that's important. You've seen, runoffs in the South tend to go Republican over the past couple decades. That's the baseline. You've seen extraordinary early vote turnout among Democrats, African American community, and you've seen the president attacking Republicans constantly, and even tweeting over the weekend that the Georgia runoff vote would be illegal, which has got to hurt. I would imagine, turnout morale,
right,
for Republicans, but not necessarily. So, but this is for all marbles. This does not get bigger than this. 2 Senate runoffs that will determine control of the Senate, but people should, keep their powder dry and not assume that we're going to know who won on election night or even the morning after.
You have always said and believed in checks and balances and divided government, and that it works better. And that is not something that you believe any longer, or in this situation. You did a reality check on that on CNN today. People should watch it.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Look, I like many centrists and independents, there's a natural instinct, certainly historically, to say, look, divided government can work fine because there's a check and there's a balance. And it means logic would suggest that the two parties would be forced to work together. The problem is that has not been the case over the last decade plus. And you need to confront and deal with that fact that divided government now means dysfunctional government. And I don't, so that idea, which is sort of comforting and quaint, I think is entirely out of touch with the reality of politics today. And you can measure that any number of different ways. One of the things I did in today's reality check is if you're a real nerd, you have a favorite chart. And I have a few of them, but one of them shows the increasing polarization of the parties in Congress over the last 4 decades. And what it is that Republicans have gotten increasingly extreme compared to the historic mean. So polarization has increased dramatically, but Democrats have only moved a tick to the left. I mean, not significantly at all. Whereas Republicans have moved significantly to the right. They've gotten much more extreme. So that's what's called asymmetric polarization. And that's why I often talk about, how hyperpartisanship's hurting our country, and polarization is become a real crisis of governance. And we're seeing all of that in real time right now, where a shocking number of Republicans are willing to embrace lies and unreality in pursuit of partisan power to assault our democracy, which people didn't necessarily think was possible before. But this is, to the extent that Trump is a symptom, not a cause, it reflects how we got here. And so I think we need to confront the fact that divided government means dysfunctional government. Joe Biden believes in that earlier era where we were able to get big things done with divided government. And there's a great history of that in the wake of the mid-20th century. Truman got the Marshall Plan done working with Republicans. Eisenhower got the interstate highway system. Johnson depended on Republicans in the Senate to pass civil rights legislation. Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House when Ronald Reagan was president. So this is within living memory, and Biden participated in a lot of that. But it does not reflect the current compositions or instincts of the parties. And you just need to recognize that fact, even if Democrats win both seats. That's a big F.
It's interesting to think about the crisis that President Obama came into, the economic crisis, and now the crisis that Joe Biden is coming into, which is twofold: economic and a public health disaster, a pandemic. Do you think? I mean, the big thing that Joe Biden needs to get done, I would say it this way, is to get as many Americans possible vaccinated as quickly as possible. You had a tweet about in the hour-long phone call that Donald Trump made to the Secretary of State of Georgia that like over 100 Americans died. And I think the point of that tweet and the point really is that he's not paying any attention. He gave an over hour-long speech in Georgia last night. No mention of COVID, I read. He didn't mention it. And so how does, can Joe Biden, with this division in Congress, get Americans vaccinated is how I'm seeing it. Well, okay. So there are two things there. The reason I did that tweet is CNN came up with a statistic yesterday that said over the past few weeks, we've seen an American die roughly every 33 seconds. We have been complete of COVID. We have become completely numb to this. If you look, I remember in the wake of 9/11 when I was working for the mayor of New York, we were trying to calculate the number of dead and put it in perspective. And it was clear, even when we didn't know the definitive numbers, that it would be among the deadliest days in American history
But the Battle of Antietam, Civil War battle, was still far and away, we believed, would be the number one deadliest day in America. It's a strange thing to put in those terms. We have exceeded that several times, unfortunately, in the last few weeks. And it has become literally unremarkable. And in part, that's because the president does not remark upon it. The New York Times had a very good analysis of sort of how Trump sort of fatally fumbled our nation's response to COVID. And the bottom line is, at every step, he was thinking about himself. And that's entirely consistent with the character of this president, but it's completely contradictory to the role of the president, as imagined by the founders, the responsibilities of the president, who's supposed to think about everything but himself first. He's supposed to put the national interest over special interest, let alone self-interest. And that's just what we've consistently not seen. And that's in some ways why it's so stunning to see so many Republicans embrace unreality and attack our democracy to further his ambitions when he's evidently not really interested in doing the job. And that's one of the many dark and strange things about the times we're living in right now.
Can Joe Biden bring us together to the point that he will be organized enough to run the federal government in a way that it gives states the resources and directions it needs to vaccinate America? You know, I think we think too much about Joe Biden. I think that we think too much about one person when it comes to politics a lot. And obviously in the Trump era, you know, even with Obama, because he was such a superstar to so many of us. But Joe Biden is probably more the sum of his parts and the people around him, many of which you know. So I would say, yes, he can, because he's going to have so many smart, capable people, including his chief of staff, Ron Klain, who will be able to get this done. The vaccination efforts, I mean.
So I'd say a few things about that. Broadly, I agree with you. Here's why. First of all, presidential leadership matters. One of the reasons we've become so deeply divided is we've never had a president who's actively tried to divide us, whose appeals to sort of the worst instincts, the worst tribal instincts of politics, and has shown that so many folks will be willing to put aside many of their own principles, their alleged principles, in order to stay in good with the group. When you have sort of someone with a bullying style running the party, remain powerful levers for people, even in an evolved democracy. But presidential leadership matters. In many ways, what Biden's greatest opportunity and responsibility is, and I think the reason why he was elected by a wide margin, let's just reemphasize that, this is that his mandate to make government work again. And the problem is that's very difficult with people, with the current composition of the Republican Party, at least the fact, you know, that you have a majority of folks in the House, it looks like, and solid dozen senators who are willing, completely without evidence, to contest his election. That said, and presidents working with Congress is one of the ways, you know, government works. And Biden believes in his ability to negotiate. He's never taken a zero-sum approach to politics. A lot of folks on the far left have been angry with him for saying he can negotiate with the Republicans. And it will be a great test of his skill and good faith to see if he can pull that off. But he comes to the job with more experience in that arena than any president since Lyndon Johnson. The broader point about the administration is, as you've seen, is that he is building a government, not a team of rivals, but a sort of a team of colleagues, people who've known each other and worked with each other and have experience in government, with the idea of making the federal government, at least the executive branch, function again. It's not an ideological exercise. It's a functional exercise, but from a center-left perspective. Those are the two ways to gauge whether he will be able to succeed. But the reason we pay attention to the president, you're right that obviously politics is much more complicated. You can't just pay attention to the president. But he does set a tone and direction for the country, and it will be interesting to see if he is able to have a degree of reset. But I don't think we can underestimate the civic rot that has set in over the past few years, and that is going to take time to heal and clean up.
How do we move forward with, what did you call it, the autocrat caucus?
The autocrat caucus.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, how do we move forward? Well, what is that, and how do we move forward if we have several United States senators from several states, as well as you said, about 140 House members who deny reality, the results of the election? I mean, it's unprecedented, obviously.
It is unprecedented. It's also not based in anything real. right? I mean, keep in mind, after the 2016 election, of course, Donald Trump, won the presidency because of the electoral vote while losing the popular vote by 2.9 million with the assistance, although we didn't know to the extent at the time, of Russian interference on his behalf. And while there were a handful of members of the House of Representatives who tried to protest the certification of certain votes, there wasn't a single member of the Democratic Senate who indulged that.
And most importantly, right? The candidate herself conceded. Most important.
The next morning, right? Before we had final totals. So just, don't buy into, there are a lot of BS historic parallels being floated around that are just totally ludicrous. I mean, Ted Cruz talking about the election of 1876. I can nerd out on that if you want. You probably don't. But it has nothing to do with today on like a million different levels. So look, what the reason I call it the autocrat caucus is I think we need to use really specific words. You know me, I've said we ought to call a lie from the beginning when I was running the Daily Beast and here at CNN in Reality Check. I don't use words like sedition lightly, but that is what we are seeing, right? And it's particularly ironic. It's coming from a lot of folks who've always styled themselves as super patriots, constitutional conservatives, et cetera.
Yeah.
The people, 126, I wrote a column when 126 Republicans signed on to the Texas Attorney General's completely ludicrous Supreme Court petition.
Oh, we've forgotten about that. It was only 2 weeks ago.
Well, I haven't, right? But that's the roots of this. And that's what I wrote a column basically saying, call these folks the autocrat caucus, and they should not be allowed to forgive it. The calculus is such that they believe it's easier for them to go along with it and avoid. They're so afraid of a tweet from a lame duck president. It's completely pathetic that they're willing to assault our democracy. But now you see it in the counting. This is the counting of the certified electoral votes. And the fact you've got now 13 with Kelly Loeffler arguing that she's going to basically try to disenfranchise Georgia's voters to get fealty from Donald Trump. 13 senators and perhaps upwards of 140 Republicans, which is potentially 3/4 of the House of Representatives. We need to name names. We need accountability because those folks are betting on short attention spans. They're betting that people will forget except for their base and their donors and the Trumps who they remain afraid of. But they are now putting their ambition and Donald Trump's autocratic ambitions over democracy, facts, and the rule of law. And we need to be clear about that, and we need to call it out, and we can't forget. So the way I view the vote that's going to happen on January 6th, Wednesday, is it's a roll call for the autocrat caucus. And we should pay close attention and not forget.
Yeah, very well said. But what is going to happen? We'll say it's today, Wednesday the 6th, because Mike Pence is in a weird situation.
Sort of, not really. Look, man. I mean, Richard Nixon was vice president when he officially tallied or accounted for JFK's win, which was, by the way, incredibly narrow. Al Gore did it in 2000. Joe Biden presided over Donald Trump. Electoral vote counting just 4 years ago. This is not unprecedented. It's only uncomfortable because Pence is so afraid of Donald Trump and is hoping to get something out of this Faustian bargain, which he probably won't get, which is Donald Trump's endorsement in 2024.
Right.
So this is, this is like the world's tiniest violin. This is like, oh, it's so hard for you to do your constitutional duty when this has already been clearly decided and there is no evidence of actual widespread voter fraud at all, which is why they've lost 60 cases in the Senate. They have nothing but lies and bluster on this front. Here's what happens. Basically, this is all basically pro forma. The Electoral College have voted. The states have certified. All this is an official counting. Right. And it dates back to the days when the electors in their respective states would, get together and people had to take time to travel and they would certify and then it would go to Congress and the new Congress would come in and, basically be like, yep, we got them all here. Thank you very much. The constitutional process is going to move forward. If members contest, House members, they have to be joined by a senator. Hasn't happened in a long, long time. It will this time, as we know, because of Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and these other cats. Although, frankly, Donald Trump's recording the call to the Georgia Secretary of State should invalidate all of that. But here's what will happen. That then sets up a 2-hour debate, up to 2 hours per state. And then there's a vote. So this will not change the outcome. Mike Pence's role is ceremonial, right? It's somebody said it's like expecting the person who opens the envelope at the Oscars to pick the best picture winner. It's a non-issue. This is all grandstanding. And that's why some people say it's a coup, but it's a kabuki coup. It's performative. I think it's far more destructive and dangerous than that because of the precedent it's setting. Because what if Republicans had a majority in the House and the Senate? What if? Could they overturn the vote of the people and then try to move it to the House where the states vote state by state as opposed to in their total numbers? That's an incredibly frightening scenario that we are closer to than we might like to admit. It will not happen this time, but that's the context they're setting up. And that's why it's so dangerous. So you're going to have a standard roll call, an objection, all designed to please Donald Trump, scratch his belly. Then you're going to have 2 hours of debate per state, and then you're going to go back and have a vote. It will make for a very long Wednesday. It possibly goes into Thursday, but it will not change the outcome of election. Full stop.
And then there's just 14 days of chaos left after that.
Yeah. Because the president is delusional. He's lashing out. He's settling scores. He's trying to do whatever he can to make the transition, to hobble the transition and make it difficult / impossible for the Biden administration. And Joe Biden's tactic is basically just to ignore the tantrum, which is a perfectly reasonable response when you have someone just having a tantrum.
Yeah.
But, you know, the OMB and the DOD have not been cooperating with the Biden transition team. That's also incredibly dangerous from a national security perspective.
Yeah.
And it gets back to the issue of legitimate. Donald Trump and his minions have absolutely assaulted the thing that makes democracies, the peaceful transfer of power, the thing that we perfected so long ago.
Yeah.
And to pretend that you're going to do that in the name of patriotism, to pretend, as the senators are saying, that, oh, they're so concerned about the allegations of voter fraud. Notice the word allegation because there's no evidence. All they're doing is adding to the confusion they say they want to clear up, and that's because they've bought into the big lie.
Yeah. Well, happy 2020.
Happy 2021, you mean?
No, it's still 2020 in terms of the behavior and
I see what you did.
No, I didn't do that.
You're just covering up a screw up.
I am. I totally am. Thank you for calling it out. Yeah, I really did. It just feels that way. I appreciate you joining me throughout 2020. Look forward to our talks in 2021. And
we will, my friend.
And keep up the great work, sir. I really when will your book be done? Will it be done in 2021 on Lincoln?
It should be published towards the end of this year. Everything's kind of gotten pushed back by COVID. And, you know, I sort of expected the election would be over and allow me to focus on it, but it's about Lincoln's plan to win the peace and how to reunite and reconciliation in a nation.
And are you still writing with an ink quill by candlelight as if you are in the late 1700s?
As I'm watching. Now, that was just Washington's farewell.
Oh, okay.
This one, to keep it more time appropriate, I try to do it by telegraph.
That's great. I like to visualize that. Thank you, sir.
All right, my man.
John Avlon, everybody, at John Avlon. Watch him on CNN. Watch his reality checks. Get all of his books. Follow him on Twitter, at John Avlon. As always, please let him know you heard him on the show. You appreciate him joining me. I had to get up early to interview John because he gets up at like 4 a.m. does the whole morning shift at CNN. So I had to get up early to join him in between hits. So please let him know that you appreciate him joining us and give me a lot of credit for getting up so early when I stay up so late. So dedicated to this daily podcast. And thank you for your support. All right. I also reached out to Jared Yates Sexton yesterday. This is, of course, before the developments of last night, the election, and other things that are, of course, happening. But we did, at the end of this conversation, play and react to Will Cain's comments on Fox News yesterday, which you may or may not have heard about. You may not know who he is. He's an old friend of mine. He used to appear on the radio show. And he went viral yesterday with some pretty incendiary comments. So I played that for him, and Jared talked about that. So definitely listen to the end. But we talked for almost an hour, Jared and I thought it was great. As always, I love talking to this guy. He is such a nice, kind, cool guy, and really smart, really thoughtful. He's an author. He is a professor, and he is prolific on Twitter, on Twitter at Yates Sexton. Get his book, American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. He's written several other books as well. And he's just a great writer and political analyst, and has had a very interesting life to draw from. I always love talking to him. Here's our conversation. So you look like a militia guy, but your glasses then do make us think like you're the leader, at least.
I'm the guy who shows up in the middle of the show after you've been dealing with the guys, and he walks in and he's got the collar popped. And it's like, now we talk.
I think you are that guy, and you are in your persona. That's who you are, but you don't look like that guy. I don't think the beard is too. Listen, you were undercover at Trump rallies for how long, and how well did you fit in? I'm strictly talking about your appearance, and now for people listening, Jared has a beard that I'm trying to catch up with.
I was sneaking into Trump rallies for about a year there.
And you've written a lot about that, and you've talked a lot about it, but because I asked about it, how much do you think about the time you spent with them, and how much do you think they evolved in any way other than to become more cult-like to the leader?
Well, you know what? I'm glad you asked that, because I was actually thinking about that the other day. I was working on adapting the book I wrote about that, and what I realized was there was like a definite flirtation and courting phase between Trump's base and Trump. Like, they would go to these rallies and they would stand in like the audience, and they would have conversations about the things that they wanted. And tell me if these things sound familiar to you. They would talk obviously about white supremacy. They would talk about the loss of white power. They would talk about wanting to imprison journalists. They would talk about wanting to. Can you hear this, by the way? Can you hear my cat?
In post, I'm going to try to bring the volume up on Cat. Does she or she have anything else to say?
He really likes it when I'm doing interviews. And so most of the time I like to put him up, but right now he's having his best time. He likes to tell the listeners what he's thinking about.
I like it as any kind of background. Do you remember what you were saying? I'm so interested in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So they would sit around and they would talk about wanting to imprison journalists. They would talk about that there were puppet masters who were running politics and economics. And basically they would go to these rallies and talk amongst themselves. And you would actually see communities start to build at Trump rallies. And as Trump said his usual bullshit, you would see that message and the conversation out in the crowd start to interlink. Right. So like Trump would get up and he would do his whole like apprentice host thing. And like, I just go on Fox News every night and say what I'm thinking. But meanwhile, the white supremacist, militant, fascistic movement started building around him. So what ended up happening was the group of people who went to the show to check it out bought the album and became like lifelong fans. And so that's how the cult actually became. They were looking for a figure like Trump this entire time. And then he came along, he said the right things, acted the right way, and everything came together pretty much perfectly at that moment. So yeah, I think a lot about how that relationship developed.
It's so interesting. I've been thinking a lot about wanting to reach out to more, I call them Trump supporters, Trump movement supporters. I don't know. I don't want to be pejorative about it simply because I don't want to be. But I want to call it something accurate. And I don't think conservative or Republicans says it. And I listened to your podcast, the Muckrake podcast, and I think a lot about the conversation I will have with them and try to have with them, and I'm not going to say haven't been having enough, but I'd like to try. But then I think about the conversation you'd have with them, and I'm just telling you right now, like, I'd pay to hear you argue with or try to reason with some of these folks. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about any effort towards that, because I can understand it all ways, but what I sometimes do is I record my conversations with them and then decide if I'm going to post them, if they're worthy of anybody's time later. And I wonder what your thoughts are and what your conversations are like generally with them.
Well, on one hand, I've been hearing a lot of people who are like, do we reach across the aisle? Do we try and find common ground or whatever? I'm actually against that. I actually think that right now, the way things are set up, if you were to talk to, and I'm kind of hesitant about that too. I'm glad you put it that way. Like, I don't want to say that they're Trumpist, because in fact, there are a group of people, some of them are, like the people I was talking about in these rallies, right? The ones who are looking for imprisoning journalists or, persecuting people of color, things like that. But then there are other people who have been won over by the really bad faith appeals that Trump has. Like, he's not actually an economic populist. He's not actually trying to make lives better for people. He's not actually trying to make middle America better.
I've heard the phrase bad faith more in the last year and a half, 2 years than I've ever heard in my life. Can you explain to me what that means? I hear gaslit, and I love Gaslit Nation with Sarah and Andrea, but I hear bad faith all the time. Who is doing it? What is Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley or Donald Trump doing in bad faith? What does that mean?
That's a gray cadre of people that you just brought up to have an example of bad faith.
I'm trying to tee up.
So, like, for instance, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley know that Donald Trump lost the election. They know that there was not widespread voter fraud. Right. They're smart enough. I mean, they're educated people. They're shrewd enough. They haven't actually bought any of this propaganda stuff. Like, one thing you need to understand is there are people in the Republican Party who turn on Fox News or Newsmax or OANN and they're like, oh, that's propaganda. They know it. They know that it's a lie. They know that it's a narrative, but that they have to stay within the orthodoxy, they have to perform a certain way, right. Which is one of the reasons why Ted Cruz is particularly insidious. He's smart enough to know this stuff, but he also believes he's ordained by God to become president someday. So he has to act in bad faith. Does he believe that? Oh, yeah, absolutely.
No.
The entire idea behind Ted Cruz is that he is like a chosen Christian who's going to lead America towards some sort of dominionist future.
Why do you think that he thinks that?
Because his dad is probably speaking somewhere right now on that very topic to some congregation. And whether or not he's acting in good faith or not is a different thing altogether.
But his dad killed JFK.
Well, people are talking. So
I don't know, but people are saying it. I don't know.
So bad faith. And when we're talking about politics, so like, for instance, the Republicans aren't actually looking to negotiate with people. They're not looking to compromise. They're just looking to gain power and profit. They're not coming to the table with any good intentions. They've come to the table simply to gain, again, profit and power. And one of the problems is that bad faith exercise. They have continually, for decades now, they have appealed to people in middle America, what you would now call the Trump base, and they have told them what they want to hear. They pretended that they're economic populists, they're quote unquote real Americans, that, Christianity is the important thing, communities are the important thing. Trump never, ever intended to help middle America. He knew that he could pull the wool over their eyes and gain their votes if he said the right thing. They're going to bring back factories. They're going to bring back mines, all this stuff. He never intended to do any of that stuff. What I think we actually need to do is we need to talk to people about differences of power versus left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. When I have a conversation with someone who is what you would describe as a Trumpist, I have a conversation that begins with, you know what, this is not a trench warfare battle. I will tell you that I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a registered Democrat. I gave up my membership with the Democratic Party. I caucus with the Democratic Party is what I do, because it's the only party that even lives within a reality we can recognize or even partially agree on. Mm-hmm. So I start by saying, I'm not an acolyte of these people. Here are the problems that I have with them. And once you sort of move around that trench warfare aspect, that your guy, my guy, whatever, they eventually will have a conversation, which is about differences in power, which is where you can actually start to talk to these people and start to find common ground.
Differences in power. What do you mean? What does that conversation because I really, again, I want to hear you. I might even set it up and just sit back and listen and to you talking to somebody, and then we can decide what to do. But what comes next? Differences of power in terms of what?
I'm sorry, this cat wants in. I mean, just knocking
at the
door.
Can you let it in?
No, I'm not letting this cat in. This cat will ruin. This cat will ruin the podcast, my friend.
That's hard to do.
Yeah, well, believe me, he will give it the old college try.
Go ahead.
So what I would say in terms of differences of power, and this is an esoteric thing. This is like a deep in the weeds thing. So like let's go ahead and do it. I got a cat outside my door trying to get in. Here's the whole point. Politics as we know it isn't reality. Politics as we know it is an illusory pageant. It's something that we watch from the sidelines and we vote on like American Idol. We have our heroes. We have our villains. We have season finales. I mean, right now we have like Sweeps Week. I mean, we're recording this on January 5th with this special election, right? We're waiting to find out. It's like a once in a year event or whatever.
This week, a special election in Georgia that determines the future of the planet. Also, will Mike Pence and Republicans certify the electors in the Congress? I don't know how do I explain what they're doing? But yeah, it's
how do you explain any of it? That's the exact same.
Well, the constitutional process that is happening tomorrow is what I'm talking about. Whatever that's happening, and
it's a total fraudulent ceremony that we shouldn't have to sit here and worry about. First and foremost,
fair enough. Yeah.
But I will say that the way that modern politics has been constructed is it's supposed to make you feel like the most that you could ever do is go out and vote every 4 years. One side says, if you don't vote for us, the entire world is going to end. The radicals are going to take it over. It'll be communist Russia before the year is out. The other side comes out and says, we're the ones who believe in actual America and we're not dicks. And that's pretty much where we are right now in the differences between the two parties. And that is not how actual politics works. That's not actually what's happening. What we've actually gotten to in this point in American history is we've gotten to a point where a political process has been bought off by the wealthy and the powerful. And they control the economic consensus. Like nobody's arguing about politics anymore. The biggest economic argument that you'll get in Congress anymore or on the national level is whether or not the rich should get further tax cuts. That's it. That is the main economic argument now. All of the other arguments are cultural or symbolic a lot of the time. So what I do when I try and talk to people who are caught in this thing over here is because Trump has a game within a game. He won the presidency by coming out and saying, all these other people are full of shit. I'm the one who's not full of shit. And everyone's like, I like how he's honest. Because they know that the other people are full of shit. So if you actually get past that and you get past the red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican conversation, you can start to have actual conversations which revolve around actual objective reality versus this entire illusory political concept.
But what do you call the laws and regulations that are passed at the local, state, and federal level that make people's lives better? Because that is happening, not nearly in the way that we would like to, especially at the federal level, but it certainly is at the state level. I always get frustrated when after a horrible, violent shooting, someone say nothing changes. I get so frustrated because that's not true. Activists have changed state gun laws all over the country, including the families of the Newtown kids. And so things do happen, especially at the local and state level, and often even at the national level, not nearly in the way that it should, not nearly as often as it should. And there's so much intransigence and gridlock, but things do happen, right? In government.
They absolutely do. I will say this. You're an old radio guy. You know this. When you start talking about state level or local level politics, you can hear the dials switch. You know what I mean? Like all politics has turned into national politics. By the way, thank you, Newt Gingrich, for that. I appreciate you being able to do that.
How did he do that? How did he do that?
In the 1990s, he figured out that you could actually take over the body of Congress by focusing on the presidency and then doing a trickle down to all the different races. It also had to do with Limbaugh and the deregulation of media.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you start having like a national idea of politics. But you're exactly right. One of the problems is that we focus on national level to the point where for most Americans, it feels completely impossible to do anything. And that's something I'm sure you see on Twitter all the time. People are like, what can I do? What can I do? And at that point, you're talking about major immovable forces. Right? Like, what does a person do when they're taking on, moneyed special interests? They're taking on billions of dollars in lobbyist movements and actions. But what you can actually do is you can change things at the local and the state level, and then it travels up. But unfortunately, we've been told that politics is all top down. It's trickle down in its own right. But it can actually be grassroots. That's when you see actual change in the country. And that's unfortunately what it's going to take to get out of this current crisis. But it's really hard to start doing that infrastructure of change at the local and state level.
Well, you talk a lot about what needs to happen is to change people's minds, especially the Trump supporters who have gone down some terrifying conspiracies rabbit holes, and they're living in them now. And it's just I actually have compassion for a lot of that. I've been thinking and talking about conspiracy theories and cults for a long time, and I have some compassion for it because they really believe it. And it's got to be scary to believe that Tom Hanks
reptilians?
Yeah.
If you believe that reptilians rule the world, like, what do you do then? I mean, I watched V in the 1980s.
Nightmare. The early, the first iteration in the...
Terrifying.
That scared the shit out of me. And it wasn't even well done. It was terribly done, but it really got me. Those lizards were terrifying.
Man, it messed me up too. And I have to tell you, when I was a little kid and I was watching that, it terrified me. Imagine if you think that was the God's honest truth and how the government worked. I mean, my God, it has to be exhausting living in that world.
But my question is about your point that you make often about how to change their minds is through material changes. And I think that's so important. And I love that you say that. And I fully agree with it. But I always, when I hear you say it on your podcast, I always want to be like, go ahead. What do you mean and how? What are you talking about material changes? I think I know what you're talking about in terms of opportunity for jobs and healthcare and opportunity and security of things that people want. But how does that happen, and where does that happen? Does that also happen at the local and state level, or can we get that done at the national level as well?
I think it's a pincher type thing. So like I was talking about this with somebody earlier today. On one hand, so I live in Georgia, and we just watched Georgia go blue for Joe Biden. There's a possibility tonight that maybe tomorrow, depends on when the results come in, that we're going to have 2 Democratic United States senators from Georgia, right? There's a real possibility. That has happened because of local organizing. Like the Democrats in the state have worked their asses off. I mean, they really, really have. And one of the things that has to happen, and this is something the Democratic Party is not good at, the Democratic Party is not good at dealing with local and state politics, particularly in red states. We've watched that. All the money gets thrown out, right? And actually, it's been thrown out since. So it used to be, for instance, Howard Dean, who is the politician that I cut my teeth on, like believing in and thinking that he could possibly change the world. Eventually, Dean became the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he completely dedicated the DNC for 50-state strategy, which said, we're not going to just throw our money where we usually win elections. We're going to be in every state. We're going to set up infrastructure. You're going to see issue. We're going to put up candidates left and right. The Democratic Party consistently just punts. And they're like, who around here wants to run for office? Congratulations, you're on your own. And what ends up happening is you have situations like what happened in Kentucky and South Carolina in 2020, where you have somebody go up against somebody like a Mitch McConnell or a Lindsey Graham, and you just have a bunch of people flush the state with cash donations, and a bunch of consultants get rich. And a bunch of TV and internet people get rich. And what ends up happening is the only Democrats that people in like a state like Georgia used to know are people at the national level who they look at as villains and awful people and New World Order conspirators and all that stuff. You have to know that your neighbor is a Democrat and that they're not evil and that they're not trying to take your money and they're not trying to ruin your life or take your guns or whatever, argument is being done today. So that has to happen on the local level. The bigger thing on the national level is Democrats have to just stop being afraid of being called communist and socialist and stop being afraid of doing something large. Like, for instance, if I was given the conch shell and I was standing up in front of the nation at this point, I'd be like, we need a massive mobilization. We need something big. We need something ambitious. And I keep saying this, but a lot of those people who voted for Donald Trump, and I know people aren't going to like hearing this, they used to be FDR Democrats. These are the people who used to have like the commemorative plates on their walls in their kitchen of Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
But that's when there was some faith across the political spectrum in what government could do and should do. And now, after you mentioned earlier, Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh and all of the media and politicians since, the right, if you will, does not see government as a solution. I mean, Reagan, his branding on government as the problem, not the solution, was the most damaging, probably, philosophy in modern American politics, I'm going to say off the top of my head.
I completely agree, but I would actually make the argument, the idea that Reagan and, of course, the new right sort of pushed forward, that government is the problem, is actually another bad faith thing. Like, they knew that government could make people's lives better.
Well, of course.
What they actually were doing was saying that government is an impediment to profit. They wanted to make sure that regulation was done away with, and they wanted to turn government into an organ for redistribution of wealth, which is something that most people don't understand in this country, which is we actually do have a massive redistribution project going on in this country. The Republicans tell you it'll go from the top down, but what we actually have is from the bottom up. And all of our money is being sent up to the top, to the wealthiest, to, by the way, people who right now, as we talk, are having a meeting about colonizing Mars. Going to Mars and setting up their own corporate, private kingdom, right? That's the problem, is that they have completely salted the earth on the idea of the government making any change. And unfortunately, with the left has more or less given up on the idea that the government can actually make life better. There's a bunch of us who are yelling at it that it can possibly do it, but every time we actually have a conversation about it, the word socialist or communist, of course, gets thrown around to the point where, nothing against John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. They're not out there pushing radical policies. They're not out there pushing leftist policies. And I have to tell you, I can't turn on my TV or internet right now without being bombarded hearing about radical Democrats and socialists and communists hanging out with Fidel Castro.
Right. It's always been an effective tactic, and it's fascinating to see, as someone who pays close attention and is a student of politics, to watch the right call the left extremists, and then the extreme left, the actual Noam Chomsky leftists, the actual communists and socialists and Marxists, are looking at the people the right is calling extremists and thinking that they are corporate shills and sellouts, whereas the right is getting exactly what they are, extremists. They have been for a very long time, for the last 30 years. They've been real extremists, but when we call them that, it doesn't have nearly as much weight. It's they are as pretty much as far right as they can get. Meanwhile, on the left, there's this real splintered, divisive theory on what it means to be left and what the.
Can you imagine if the left was as organized as they say that we are? Can you, because it sounds like we're all having meetings.
The left can never be as organized as the right can, because the right is very, very narrow and homogenous and similar and white and mostly Christian.
Well, they don't actually have ideas either. That's the problem.
Right.
Because they're not actually interested in government doing anything.
Right, they want to destroy it, get it out of their lives.
They want to drown it in a bathtub.
But they don't even know what it is. They don't even know what government does. That's where, I'm sorry to be, but they don't value so many of the things that government does, or they undervalue it at the least, and they think much of what government is doing is giving away money, their hard-earned money, to lazy people. That narrative is also extremely powerful.
Well, and it's important to point out, going back to FDR, that What we're talking about right now is the result of a project that has been going on for 80 years now. Like the New Deal, when it was being pushed by FDR, was radical and crazy. And my God, it has to be stopped. I mean, there were even rumors that like the major wealthy people in the country were meeting trying to figure out how to depose FDR. I mean, that's still up for debate about exactly what was happening there. So, of course, then we get through World War II, we get on the other side of it, and the right spent all of their energy and capital dismantling the New Deal. And by the way, we don't get taught this in classrooms. Nobody talks about it all that often. That's what McCarthyism was. McCarthyism was actually going after New Dealers. They were calling everybody who was engaged in the construction of the social safety net after the Great Depression into calling them communist and socialist and rooting them out of government. And so what ended up happening was every idea of the left, be it organized labor, the social safety net, using government as a means of public good, all of those things were effectively rebranded as communist and socialist throughout the Cold War. And so we've gotten to this point now, and this is unfortunate, but in the 1980s, when Reagan won re-election, and by the way, absolutely destroyed every challenger that he ever came across, the Democratic Party met and they said, you know what, we're never going to win again unless we embrace Reaganism. And what you ended up seeing is Democrats realized that they had to run to the right of the Republican Party for years. They had to say, we're actually tougher on crime. We're actually more interested in fiscal conservatism, which is one of the amazing truths of the last few decades, which is Republicans don't actually have an ideology anymore. They're not socially conservative. They're not fiscally conservative. They're not pro-troop. They're not actually patriotic. Their entire political movement is based upon perceived persecution. And I don't know if you saw this clip today. I thought it was incredibly telling. It was on Fox News where they said, well obviously there was voting fraud.
Hold on a second. You're talking about Will Cain on Fox News today, aren't you?
Yeah, where he said,
I want to play it and have you respond to it. I actually was going to do this. I was planning on doing this when I talked to you, and then technically I wasn't sure how to do it, but I think I can play it so that you can hear it, and then I'll just edit this later. But we'll play. Does that work for you if I play it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You should be able to hear it, I think, but tell me if you can't. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
But we are friends sometimes off camera as well. We were having a steak last night talking about this, and this is how I feel. I think Americans, I think Republicans, conservatives.
Why are you laughing already?
Because he's talking about perceived persecution, and he's talking about sitting around eating a steak.
Okay, here we go.
Can be forgiven for their skepticism, because whether or not an election was rigged, it certainly feels like society is rigged right now. From the complete squelching of dissent on college campuses, inside the media institutions.
Let's take that real quick. The thing that, by the way, this guy, Will Cain, a lot of listeners know, and you don't, and I want to make sure that you're in the loop, is a close personal friend of mine. And I haven't talked to him since he took the Fox News gig, and I don't know what to do or say, and I'm really struggling because he was so there for me when I was broken last. So there's a lot of personal stuff here, sure. But I don't want you to consider that at all in your commentary. We can talk about it later, but just to the point that he just made, a complete squelching of free speech. There are issues there. I admit that, and we should talk about it. But what is your quick reaction to that? Because the thing that triggered me was complete.
Whatever avenue he's coming from, whatever angle he's coming from, he has his finger right on the pulse of conservative America. And actually, we should stop you calling them conservative, the Republican America, whatever we want to call it. It is perceived persecution. Nothing that is happening on college campuses is actually affecting them. Maybe they don't like it. Maybe they're troubled by it. It doesn't actually affect whether or not they have power. Right now, Mitch McConnell, depending upon what happens in Georgia, can squelch every piece of legislation that the Republican Party has no interest in.
That's such a great point. That's where the power lies with Mitch McConnell and squelching not speech, but every single important piece of legislation. Can I press play?
Well, real fast, yeah. I think it's important to point out the other part of the project that Mitch McConnell has been a part of. They have now created a backstop in the United States Supreme Court. They have created anything that comes through, even if they lose the presidency and the entire Congress, anything that comes through for a generation now has to go through this meticulously crafted Supreme Court. They have every avenue of power. They've moved every angle. But the problem, and this is a white, misogynistic Christian idea, and it goes back to the very beginning of quote unquote Western civilization, which is the idea that even when you have all power, you're still being persecuted. Somebody is still coming after you. There's a reason why even as the church dominated the world, they still had to have the Inquisition, Pete. Because there might be somebody out there who's trying to persecute you. All of it has to do with the fact that the world is never enough. It doesn't matter how much power you have. It feels. It's about feelings, which is the incredible thing. You want to go back to college campuses? What have all these people said over and over again? Facts don't care about your feelings. Oh, you're triggered. Oh, you're hurt. It's a projection of conservative perceived persecution.
Another friend of mine who's real smart, because it was a private text, I won't say his name, responded similarly when he said the conservatives have said for so long, quote, facts don't care about your feelings. So to see them essentially empower a would-be autocrat who violates everything they believe because his lies reflect their feelings and therefore they're willing to try to undo an election is totally illegitimate. Plus, you're morally responsible for what you say when you have the microphone. It's not performance art. It's news. And I thought that was a really interesting reaction based on what you just said about that facts don't care about your feelings phrase that they've made.
Well, that's the whole thing with Trump. It was like when in 2016, you remember this, he lost by 3 million votes in the popular vote.
Yeah.
Right. How many illegals voted?
I think it was 3 million and one.
Yeah, 3,000,001.
Yes.
It's about feeling
Polish guy, not even a Mexican, a Polish.
That's right. It was just people who just never got signed up for Social Security. But one of the things that goes back to a conversation we've been having, which is what is fascism? Why do I keep saying fascism? All this stuff. This is really important. And this is because whenever we talk about fascism, we imagine there's some charismatic leader who hypnotizes an entire nation and then suddenly everybody's doing whatever. No, it's about feelings. And if you actually look at the history of fascism and authoritarianism, it's about groups of people who feel a truth that they can't prove, but they have to make everybody live under that truth via intimidation or violence or murder or, some sort of oppression by the state. It is all about the fact that you have a bunch of people who can have every little bit of power, but they still feel persecuted.
And they really do. It's so well said. They really do, because the way that you, of course, they're losing power. They're losing their ability to say the things they want. Mitch McConnell runs the government, and conservatives, far right, extreme far right conservatives are in the majority on the Supreme Court. So even if you were able to get some piece of, quote, progressive legislation out of Congress with Mitch McConnell's blessing or somehow Republican votes, it could then be challenged to the Supreme Court, who is made up of people who think the moon is made of cheese and Earth is flat and Jesus is on his way back.
And here's an important thing that goes along with this that goes back to exactly what we were talking about. The Republican Party has no incentive whatsoever to make the lives of their voters any better, right? Because they actually serve like a wealthy, moneyed elite. They want to make sure that they can't possibly be taxed or have regulations against them. But they have a really insidious notion, which is they can make sure that their lives aren't made better, but they can redirect their anger. If we actually want to reach these people, if we actually want to make this country better, the conversation that we're having right now, that feeling of persecution, we have to start talking about the people who actually do have their lives that aren't working. Right? We need to separate between the people who are like, did they say Merry Christmas to you or Happy Holidays versus, are you going to get health care? Are you going to die short? Like,
and the real, you're absolutely right. But let's be clear. White, straight, Christian, poor people suffer from all types of maladies, socioeconomic, mental health, addiction, and so on. But of course, all other categories of human Americans do as well, but they also suffer from sexism and racism and different types of bigotry and xenophobia. And so we can all relate to being persecuted and to struggling, but we can't all relate to being persecuted and struggling based on immutable characteristics that we just got lucky. I mean, it's not
right. So by the way, that is one of the major problems in this country is figuring out. And I have to say that it's not checkers, it's chess. That's the problem here. Like like on one hand, you're right. You're 100% right that right there, like having a conversation, like going home to talk to my family or talking like I don't even remember what that's like at this point in the pandemic, but like to actually go in home and talk about privilege, societal privilege, personal privilege, those types of things. That right there, that's a non-starter with them, because
struggle and suffering and pain are something all humans deal with. Maybe we just need to switch the words to communicate better.
And that's the whole point, is we can have a conversation, and like you can even keep it selfish. This is something I'm trying to argue, which is white people, particularly poor white people, have everything to gain by having a fairer economy in politics. They'll actually make more money. They'll live longer. Their lives will be better. That frustration, that perceived persecution will give way to actual material gains. Like you can even keep it as a selfish standpoint. And unfortunately, the keys that the Republicans keep playing are all about those selfish chords. It's, existing prejudices, it's existing hatred, existing distrust, those types of things. You can overcome them, but a lot of the times you're going to have to do it from a selfish standpoint. And it sucks because you're exactly right. There are such things as social and personal privilege. Those things actually do exist. We have to figure out some way to destroy this propaganda chute that the Republicans have created and actually have a conversation that has something to do with objective reality. I think that's like one of the main issues of our time.
All right, this clip is 1 minute long, and we've listened to 25 seconds. I'm going to start it over and play the whole minute and then let you react to the latter half, because we've been reacting mostly to the first half. Here it is again, the full minute, the great Will Cain on Fox News.
And sometimes Pete and I pretend to be friends on television, but we are friends sometimes off camera as well. We were having a steak last night talking about this, and this is how I feel. I think Americans, I think Republicans, conservatives can be forgiven for their skepticism, because whether or not an election was rigged, it certainly feels like society is rigged right now. From the complete squelching of dissent on college campuses, inside the media institutions, to being lied about the Hunter Biden story, to watching President Trump impeached, every step of the way watching President Trump undermine his legitimacy question, that when you deal with that for not just 4 years, but decades, you start to think, if not an election, the entire society is rigged against people who hold my values. And at some point, Steve Ainsley and Brian, you begin to understand that kind of skepticism.
Especially at the end when you're told, no, you can't question it. There will be no questioning at the end. The more you're told not to question, the more you're told not to challenge, the more people feel like, something's not right here.
And sometimes.
Okay. Jared?
I would change one thing that he said, and I think it would be a perfect encapsulation. He says, at one point he goes, people who have beliefs like me, that's not true. The actual statement should be people who look like me. Because that's what this is all about. What we're actually talking about is the collapse of white misogynistic supremacy in this country. Like that illusion, which, by the way, has held this country like based in its own reality since the very beginning, that's starting to go away. That's starting to flicker. We're starting to see through it. We understand what the dog whistles are. They shine through at this point. They're on a frequency that we can hear. By the way, thanks Donald Trump for making that very apparent. In his 4 years, he made it very apparent that the meritocracy isn't real and that racism is real and systemic prejudice is totally rife through this entire thing. But what he just said, he still knows the code words that keep it from being a quote unquote canceling moment. Right. And when he says things that I believe or the religious idea that I have, what it's actually girding is white misogynistic supremacy. That is what's actually shining through.
The way that I know him so well and I've known him so long, and the way that he delivers his commentary is intimidating and convincing and effective and very difficult to argue with. I always admired his ego, Will Cain, for going toe to toe with people he had no business being in the ring with, like policy experts. He's just a commentator, a pundit, and he is a lawyer. But nonetheless, he had no right being in the same room with someone like, I think, Paul Krugman. But boy, is he effective and concise and succinct and passionate. And oh my goodness, he's going to be a primetime host. He can do whatever. He can write his own check because that's how good he is. And I don't know how to address it.
That's who Sean Hannity is. Sean Hannity, I mean, like the record there is clear. Sean Hannity has no idea at any given time what he's talking about. As a matter of fact, if you actually go back to Roger Ailes' history, Roger Ailes picked his host by turning off the volume on the TV and watching them.
Is that right?
Right? Yeah, he didn't care what they actually said. It was how they looked, how they delivered things. Sean Hannity, and by the way, like, you can hate Hannity as much as you want. Sean Hannity has done an incredible Peter Sellers being there, like, impression throughout his entire career. Like, there's no conversation that he has any business being a part of. But what it is, and this actually is very important, it's the emotion of it. It's the feeling of it, and it's the rage of it. And again, this goes back to what we were talking about. There are people in America who have every reason to be pissed off. They just don't know who to be pissed off at.
Yes.
And these people are telling them who to be pissed off at, and it feels right because those prejudices are baked into the bread.
Yes, they're in line with legitimate grievances at the grievance department, and when they get to the booth, when they're up, it's Hannity behind the window blaming the wrong thing for their grievance.
Yeah, and I have to so I come from Middle America.
Giving them a piece of paper, said, here you go. This is who to blame, and this is who to focus your ire on. Thank you. Next. And they give them the same piece of paper. And it's a picture of the black guy.
I come from Middle America. I come from a small Indiana town. I have to tell you, Pete, like, you know what I enjoyed doing when I was little? My family loved this. My town loved this. We had
making moonshine, cow tipping, killing vulnerable animals with large ammunition. Am I close?
I'll tell you the one thing, and this is going to be the most hick thing I'm going to say on a podcast.
BB gun wars,
which is when we would go corning.
Yes,
which is
that?
It's where you get a bunch of ears of corn.
Yeah.
And you shuck them and you get all the kernels off of them, and put them in buckets, and then you wait in ditches on the side of the road in the dark. And as a car goes by, you throw all the kernels in the car.
They look like Vietnamese hand grenades.
So that's where I'm coming from. And I have to tell you, do you know what's a lot of fun? It's going to a 4th of July parade. It's getting blitzed. It's going out and shooting guns and doing stuff like that. It's easy. It's simple. And I have to tell you, as somebody who has to study politics, before we got on this, do you know what I just spent all of today researching? The Atlantic slave trade. And it was grueling and exhausting, and learning about, like, putting people through these tortures. It was so hard. And, like, I have to sit there and be like, my God, humanity is capable of doing this shit. It's a lot easier to just turn it off. And these people say, don't worry about it. Throw around football.
Yes.
We used to dance. We used to go to parades. What are we doing here? And it's so much harder to actually examine social and personal privilege and think about who you are and where you come from and what you've done and how to be a better person. My God, going to therapy.
Why is that hard? Why is that so hard?
Well, because it's so much easier to live in ignorance of it, and again, just go outside. And I mean, I'm sorry, but America is engaged right now in an incredible mental health crisis.
Yeah,
and we don't even talk about. We don't talk about the fact that we have a mentally ill president who has a mentally ill base, and they're delusional, and they're angry, and they're projecting their own psychosexual bullshit on everybody. It's awful. It's not fun. Put me back in the Matrix. That's what a lot of these people want to scream.
Yeah, no. Well, we should talk about it. Let's talk about it as much as we can, as openly as we can, especially you and I, two straight white guys. Actually, I don't know your sexuality. I made an assumption there. But whatever you are, I don't give a fuck. And I think that we should discuss this as often, as openly as we can, because I saw a tweet today that said... it was weird because I just kind of dismissed it and I related to it. But then what you just said, this country's dealing with a mental health crisis, reminded me of the tweet which said, everybody I know is at the end of their rope. And I was like, wow, that's actually true for the first time in generations, where the vast majority of people, including the rich and the privileged, are at the end of their ropes, because everything is scary and harder with this pandemic and the president and everything that's happening around the election.
Well, I would make the argument, and this is one of the major problems, I think, with our society and probably world in general. Like, look at Donald Trump and what a perfect cipher he is. That dude supposedly has billions of dollars. He has planes with his name on the side. He lives in like a gilded apartment. He can go anywhere, do whatever. He's a miserable asshole. Just a miserable human being. Nothing can fill that hole. Most of the people right now who are like nearing $1 trillion, they're not happy. Yeah. We all know that material things don't actually, they can make us happy for a second. You know, they can hit that serotonin spot for us. But what we're actually doing is we are in this cycle where the people who are making lives ruinous for the rest of us, they're not even happy. They can't help themselves, which is, by the way, why we need regulations and why the government should be involved in economics, because they are going to crash this damn plane into the ground. I've seen it happen. We've all seen it happen. Yeah. We're going to watch it again because they cannot help themselves. Yeah. And meanwhile, we're all sitting around like, and I don't know how you were. I was watching, I actually found this really kind of poignant. It was on New Year's Eve, but like watching like the coverage of it, where you have like hosts who are supposed to like make it fun. And even the hosts, like in between bits, are like, oh God, this year.
Well, I have, as an entertainer, I have a lot of thoughts about New Year's Eve programming, and the main one is that someone, probably all straight people, thought if you put two gay guys on camera together who are actually personal friends, two white gay guys, it's a no-brainer. They don't need any kind of writing or guests or other talent. They're going to be great. I find Anderson Cooper and Andy Cohen to be so cringeworthy to watch. It's horrendous. And then the rest of them, I mean, there was a guy performing going, all right, everybody, it's almost time. New Year's, actually, it was about 8 o'clock p.m. He goes, we got like 4 hours to go. And the whole place was empty. All of his energy was phony, and it was brutal to watch.
I felt bad.
I felt horrific for him.
It was disturbing.
And I would have taken the gig. Thing. Don't get me wrong.
You would have been great. I found myself thinking Pete should be out there.
Oh, That's I've been honest. I'd have been like, this is so awkward and so tragic.
But I do want to point this out because, listen, I understand sometimes in the shit I talk about that, like, some people think I'm a killjoy. I have hope. And I have to tell you, and this is the honest to God truth, and one of my heroes, and I assume one of yours, George Carlin, would talk about this all the time. He's like, you know, when people start talking about how shitty things are, I get hope. And here's the reason why. Any philosopher worth their salt, anybody who looks at these things, they understand that, like, when times are great, nobody's thinking about change. Everybody's thinking about riding off that wave. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. People weren't talking about change back then. They were talking about getting wealth and conspicuous consumption. Right now, cocaine. We are in a situation where we're having actual conversations with one another. And this is funny. A few years ago, when people asked me how I was, I stopped saying, oh, I'm good, and just answering. And people don't like that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
you and I are very similar in a lot of ways, and it's always eerie to find that out. But no, I worked in corporate media, and when I'd walk into the kitchen at Sirius XM and someone would say, how are you? I would give them a really thoughtful, sometimes nuanced answer about what was happening in my life, and it would shock the shit out of them, and they would run out of that kitchen.
And by the way, that is gone now. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Go ahead.
Nobody anymore wants to hide that shit. Everyone now is like, I am at the edge of something. Yeah. I feel like I'm barely keeping this ship together. I'm thinking about things I've never thought about before. I'm having to reconsider changing my entire life, yada, yada, yada. That's actually important. And if you actually look at the history of progressive movements, you actually find that they all start with people engaging in solidarity, which is intimacy, which is having conversations. Like at work, you would have people in factories who'd be like, hey, the boss is kind of an ass, isn't he? And they're like, yeah, he is. And it's like, oh, oh, I'm not the only one.
Right.
Other people think it. Oh, you're mistreated. How much do you get paid? That's not what I get paid. And you start having conversations about that. That's how movements begin. And I actually feel like Americans are waking up. And I feel like the misery of this moment and the misery of the Trump years and the misery of the pandemic and this ongoing austerity, unnecessary artificial austerity, I think it's gotten to the point where people are starting to cut out their bullshit and have actual conversations, which is important. That's how movements start.
I'll end it there because we had an awesome conversation, and that is a positive note to end on. Thank you very much, Jared Yates Sexton. Always a pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, buddy.
And that is today's episode of Stand Up. Thank you very much to both John Avlon and Jared Yates Sexton. Get all of their books. Follow them on Twitter. Tell them that you heard them here. And as I'm recording this, it looks like the Democrats may have taken back the Senate. It may not be for days that we know, so I'm just going to wrap it up right now and say thank you for listening. I hope to see you Thursday night at 8. Talk more about all of this. If you're at the end of your rope, reach out, connect with somebody. You're never alone if you're a stand-up, a Pete Dominick community member. You can hang out with us on the Discord platform and just sign up right now. Paid subscription link at the show notes or patreon.com/Pete Dominick. I love you, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up. Take it away, John Carroll.
The sirens tease you better stand up, stand